The Kingdom of Truth, John 18 verse 37, 38a. Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator. Pilate asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus in response asks Pilate, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" That is, are you using the term king in the Roman sense or in the Jewish sense? Pilate replies, "Am I a Jew?" That is, Pilate is speaking of kingship in the Roman sense. Jesus explains that he is not a king in the sense Pilate has in mind. "My kingdom is not of this world, but my kingdom is not from the world." Jesus is not speaking about being a king in the earthly, political sense. Still, Jesus claims to be a king. So Pilate asks another question. "So you are a king? That is, are you a king in any sense of the word?" This time Jesus replies with a ringing affirmation, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Jesus is king, then, of the kingdom of truth. The citizens of this kingdom are those who are of the truth. They hear and obey the voice of the king of that kingdom. They are supremely devoted to the truth. The Roman Empire, of which Pilate was an official representative, was not a kingdom of truth. Its citizens heard and obeyed the voice of Caesar. Its officials were supremely devoted, not to truth, but to power. Here are two kingdoms face to face: the Roman Empire, built on the lust for power, and the kingdom of Jesus, which is the kingdom of truth. Everyone claims to be in favor of truth, of course. Yet in fact there are various attitudes to truth. In particular, the portion of Scripture which is before us suggests three different attitudes to truth, namely: 1. Pilate's attitude to truth, or truth for man's sake. 2. The philosopher's attitude to truth, or truth for truth's sake. 3. Jesus' attitude to truth, or truth for God's sake. First, let us consider 1. Pilate's attitude to truth, truth for man's sake. Pilate sneeringly asks Jesus, "What is truth?" and apparently does not even pause for an answer. Pilate was a hard-headed Roman, a practical man of the world. He was what some people today would call a realist. To Pilate, truth is something to be used in the struggle to get ahead in life. To Pilate, the question of truth is really subordinate to the question of man's ambitions at the moment. Is Jesus to be treated as innocent or as guilty? 3 times Pilate declares Jesus innocent. Yet his final verdict is that Jesus shall be treated as guilty. Pilate is more concerned about the political needs of the hour than about questions of law and evidence. He is not deeply concerned about the question, is Jesus really guilty? Rather, he is concerned about the question, what will happen if I do not declare Jesus to be guilty? Soon the Jews will be shouting, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend." The clamor of the Jews is ringing in Pilate's ears. Their clamor is louder than the claims of truth. So truth must be bent and twisted to fit the exigencies of the hour. Russian communism has murdered truth by regarding it as a plastic substance to be molded and remodeled to fit the changing party line of the day. In Russia, history has been revised and radically altered. Names have been removed from history books and encyclopedias. What was declared to be true of Trotsky in 1918 was no longer held to be true in 1930. What was true of Stalin in 1940 was reversed by the party line in 1956. At one time, nothing was too good for the Soviet state to say about Stalin. At another time, nothing was too bad for the Soviet state to say about Stalin. Truth under communism is whatever suits man's purpose at the moment, whatever seems temporarily likely to advance the cause of the Soviet state. Under communism, truth has been murdered, not only in the field of politics or government, but throughout the whole fabric of life. Truth in literature and in the field of science has been dictated by the Kremlin on the basis of serving the Communist Party's passing needs. So a Soviet biologist, Lysenko, against all the biological science of the free world, held that changes produced by environment are inherited. This notion was promoted because it was held to fit communist social ideology. For many years, Soviet agriculture forfeited the tremendous gains that might have been achieved by the use of hybrid corn or maize. A doctrinaire notion, canonized as truth by the Kremlin, tied the hands of Soviet scientists and agricultural experts. But a few years later, the Soviet state reversed the doctrine of heredity, which it had once sponsored as essential to the party line. Now hybrid corn is produced in large quantities in the Soviet Union. It is not only Pilate and the Kremlin that regard truth as a plastic to be bent and molded to fit man's changing purposes and goals. This attitude, although in a milder and less shocking form, is widespread in our present-day Western culture. There is, of course, a wide difference between the aims of communism and the aims of those in Western culture who regard truth as relative to man's experiences. Nevertheless, the two share the same perverse attitude to truth as something changeable and relative to man's needs and experiences. In particular, modern theories of ethics have been influenced by this plastic view of truth, as have modern views of education. This betrayal of truth in our Western culture is inherent in the philosophy called pragmatism or instrumentalism. Pragmatism, a typically American philosophy, was originated by C.S. Peirce, advocated by William James, and later widely popularized by John Dewey. It was Dewey who adopted the name instrumentalism for it. This philosophy is defined as a system of thought in which stress is placed upon practical consequences and values as standards. Funk and Wagnalls defines pragmatism as the metaphysical theory that reality is for man what he makes it to be in the service of so-called practical ends. Webster defines pragmatism as emphasis upon the application of ideas or the practical bearings of conceptions and beliefs, adding that it is characteristic of this philosophy to hold that the meaning of conceptions is to be sought in their practical bearings, and that the function of thought is as a guide to action, and that the truth is preeminently to be tested by the practical consequences of belief. Webster defines instrumentalism as the conception that the significant factor of a thing is its value as an instrument, specifically, the doctrine that ideas are instruments of action and that their usefulness determines their truth, pragmatism, humanism. Dewey had little patience with orthodox Christian belief. In his book A Common Faith, he said that God is a name for the active relation between the ideal and the actual in human life, page 51. In the same book, Dewey said, faith in the continued disclosing of truth through directed cooperative human endeavor is more religious in quality than is any faith in a completed revelation, page 26. Thus he rejected the Bible as a completed revelation of truth by God to man. According to Dewey, there cannot be any such thing as absolute truth. Something is to be regarded as true if it functions satisfactorily or produces a desirable practical result. Dewey wrote two types of books, those on education and those on philosophy. His books on education have apparently been much more widely read than his philosophical writings. In the latter, his radical rejection of the historic Christian view of truth is quite explicit, whereas in the former it is a concealed assumption rather than an expressly avowed position. This may perhaps explain why many students of education have absorbed a good deal of Dewey's attitude to truth without realizing how radically antagonistic it is to the very foundations of the historic Christian faith. When carried out consistently, pragmatism or instrumentalism involves the rejection of absolute truth and the rejection of absolute, permanently valid moral standards. Everything is made relative to man's changing, developing situation of the moment. Truth becomes something like a wage scale, which is geared to a constantly fluctuating cost of living index. This view of truth has infected religion also. It is manifested in the prevalent substitution of the concept of value for that of truth. Our forefathers, in considering any doctrine of religion, were primarily concerned about the question, is it true? But today it is more common to waive the question of truth and ask instead, what is its value? We are told today, for example, that the Westminster Confession of Faith was an excellent book for the Christians of the 17th century, because it represented their efforts to clothe their religious experience with garments made from the mental concepts they were familiar with. Their experience, we are told, had a reality and a value, but the garments they clothed it with were only of passing importance. Today, we are told, we must clothe our religious experience in new concepts which have meaning to the man in the street in our own day. Thus, truth becomes a mere changing garment or vesture by which each generation expresses, in its own way, its own experiences. The experience is held to be permanently valid, but the truth, by which it is expressed, is held to be changeable and constantly changing. Those who hold this view of religion regard the Westminster Confession and other great historic creeds of the Church as mere museum pieces today, documents with a certain historical interest, but not really usable by modern men. Real biblical Christianity deals in truth, absolute, unchanging, unbendable truth. The modern counterfeit of Christianity, on the other hand, deals in values, that is, whatever is regarded as useful for some human need or purpose. Jesus, the King of the Kingdom of Truth, calls the world back to truth. Now let us consider 2. The philosopher's attitude to truth, truth for truth's sake. We may glimpse the Greek philosopher's attitude to truth lurking behind Pilate's sneering question, what is truth? The Greek philosophers engaged in an endless search for truth. Always in pursuit of truth, they never reached any fully satisfactory conclusions. Their quest for truth was an endless chain reaction. There was never any end to the long, long trail. What one philosopher set forth as final, the next showed to be inadequate. We may glimpse the Greek philosopher's attitude to truth lurking behind Pilate's sneering question, what is truth? The Greek philosophers engaged in an endless search for truth. Always in pursuit of truth, they never reached any fully satisfactory conclusions. Their quest for truth was an endless chain reaction. There was never any end to the long, long trail. What one philosopher set forth as final, the next showed to be inadequate. Moreover, even at any one time the philosophers could never agree among themselves. They were divided into sects and schools which mutually contradicted each other. To the practical man like Pilate it must have all seemed a hopeless and useless tangle of words and phrases. No doubt Pilate considered all philosophers a bit odd, men who devoted their lives to the pursuit of something as elusive as truth, something so elusive that they could not even agree on what they were seeking. Surely, Pilate may have thought, philosophy may be all right for these strange fellows who are a little cracked. Let them talk about truth, it is harmless, even though useless, but as for me, a man of the world who has to make practical decisions, I have to keep my feet on the ground. I cannot go around with my head in the clouds talking about abstract theories of truth. The Greek philosophers professed deep devotion to truth, but it was truth for truth's sake. This may seem higher and more noble than Pilate's cynical attitude to truth, but it is still too low a view of truth. Like art for art's sake, truth for truth's sake is essentially a form of idolatry. What is idolatry? Idolatry is giving our supreme loyalty and devotion to anything or anyone other than the living God. Art for art's sake is idolatry. It is a denial of man's obligation to love and serve God supremely in the sphere of his aesthetic life. Ultimately, it is a denial that man is a creature of God. So also, truth for truth's sake is idolatry. It is idolatry just as surely as bowing in the temple of Baal is idolatry. It is a denial of man's obligation to love and serve God supremely in the sphere of knowledge. Ultimately, it is a denial that man is a creature of God. The philosophers regarded truth as a more ultimate concept than God. In other words, they held that something is in harmony with God because it is true, not that something is true because it is in harmony with God. To them, truth was the largest circle, and God was a smaller circle within that largest circle. They regarded impersonal, abstract truth as something greater, wider, and more important than the personal, living God. To the Greek philosophers, the outermost circle of man's environment was not a person but a thing. Truth for truth's sake seems better than truth for man's sake, just in the same sense that a subtle and cultured idolatry seems less shocking and offensive than a crude and repulsive one. But still, it is an idolatry. We can put Baal in the place of God, or we can put human ambition and development in the place of God, or we can put abstract impersonal truth in the place of God. In any case, it remains idolatry. This idolatry of truth for truth's sake is as characteristic of the scholarly world of our own day as it was of the scholarly world of Pilate's day. It is regarded as almost axiomatic today that a real scholar is interested in truth for truth's sake. To challenge or question this notion may seem almost like academic blasphemy. Yet it must be challenged in the name of the living God. Truth for truth's sake always falls short of the real truth. In the end, it comes down to God or man as the object of our supreme devotion. Either God or man is the king of the kingdom of truth. The worshipper of Baal is really worshiping an idea formed by the mind of man. The devotee of truth for truth's sake is also really worshiping an idea formed by the human mind. He holds that man, not individually, of course, but collectively, is the king of the kingdom of truth. The truth he seeks is an impersonal projection of the human mind. In the end, it comes down to truth for man's sake or truth for God's sake. Finally, let us consider 3. Jesus' attitude to truth, truth for God's sake. The universe would not even exist except for the creative activity of God, the mysterious, infinite, almighty person who is above and beyond all facts, all laws, all thinking, all ideas. God is a particular person, not an impersonal function of the universe or of man's mind. If God is really the creator of the universe, then the creator must be greater than the creation, as the builder is greater than the building he constructs. But in that case, the notion of truth for truth's sake is an idolatry after all, and only truth for God's sake can be the proper object of a Christian scholar's quest and devotion. This implies the constant recognition of the true background of all human knowledge. Whether in the humanities or in the sciences, the facts which are studied must be seen as facts created by God. Only when seen in relation to God can facts be seen in their true meaning and significance. God is the background of all reality and of all knowledge. The greatest peril facing American Christian higher education today, in my judgment, is not the peril of too little emphasis on religion. Some hold that it is. I believe they are mistaken. Rather, I would venture to assert, the greatest peril facing Christian higher education in America today is the peril of a dichotomy or division between the religious features and the so-called secular features of education. It is the peril of a division into watertight compartments of two sectors or parts of the educational field, with the accompanying tacitly held notion that God is important for one of these compartments, but irrelevant for the other. The tendency in Christian circles today is to think that if the Bible teaching in a Christian college is sound and the worship service is adequate, then all is well. The tendency is to think that God is interested in nothing but religion. But God is God everywhere. He is God of everything. He is the Lord of all reality and of all knowledge. If God is not the God of nature, then he is not the God of religion either. If he is not God in the field of history, and the field of language, and the field of psychology, and the field of physical science, and the field of biological science, and the field of social science, if he is not Lord over all these, then he is not really Lord of religion either. God is Lord over all reality, or he is nothing at all. Do we sense this peril facing American Christian higher education, the peril of limiting God to the field of religion, the peril of relating God in a meaningful way only to the field of religion? While the idolatries of truth for man's sake and truth for truth's sake are left to dominate the vast field of life and knowledge outside the limited sphere called religion, what is needed in Christian education today, I would urge, is not more emphasis upon religion, but rather a more pervasive, meaningful, and relevant belief in God beyond the sphere of religion. To put it another way, what is needed is a pervasive and thoroughly self-conscious theistic philosophy as the background and interpretive key and unifying principle of all knowledge in every field. The kingdom over which Jesus is king is the kingdom of truth. He is supreme in this kingdom. Those who are of the truth hear his voice. They are the citizens of the kingdom of truth. To them, devotion to truth is not an idolatry, because it is not truth for man's sake nor truth for truth's sake, but truth for God's sake to which they are devoted. For Jesus is none other than the living God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Devotion to Jesus Christ is devotion to truth for God's sake. There is nothing and no one greater than the eternal Word, God the Son, the personal wisdom. His nature determines the nature of truth. It is the eternal Word, who is the truth, John 14 verse 6, that makes truth true. It was his eternal thinking that made the laws of mathematics and of logic what they are. It was the working of his infinite mind that planned the universe with all its mysterious and marvelous laws and forces. The mysteries of mind and matter were planned by his thinking in the silent vastness of eternity. The vastness of the spiral galaxies in remotest outer space sprang from the thinking of the eternal Word, whom we know in human history as the Lord Jesus Christ. For the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The baffling complexities of the atom were planned in eternity by Jesus Christ. In the infinite reaches of his own eternity, he planned the package. At the creation of the universe, he wrapped it up. Man is only beginning to unwrap it today. Shall we face it, Christ is of cosmic significance. It is the great heresy of our day to regard Christ as having only religious significance. Christ is the King of all truth, not just the king of religious truth. The need of our idolatrous age is to relate all our thinking, not just our religious thinking, but all of our thinking, to Christ, the eternal Word, the Son of the living God, the planner, creator, purpose, and Lord of all reality, the King of truth. Shall we dare to seek and love truth for God's sake? Shall we dare to break with the dominant trends of our age? Shall we dare to be citizens of the real kingdom of truth?